Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. In a previous devotion, we talked about having a balanced view of the body and how we can fall into two extremes. We either worship the body and make our whole lives about our bodies, or we can totally despise our bodies and completely neglect or abuse our bodies. But First Corinthians chapter 6, the latter part of the chapter, gives us a balanced view. The scriptures both tell us the dangers of the body, but also how God views the body, and that he wants to, one day he will resurrect it, that he is for the body, that it is a temple of God. And we went through all those things in that devotion. Well, today in First Corinthians chapter 7, we're going to find that the same can be said of the world, because once again, we can fall into two major extremes. We could either be worldly Christians and be all about the world, and our minds continually on how we can acquire more of the world, and always focused on our status in the world, always concerned about how people view us and trying to be popular and things like that. There's one extreme where we make our whole lives about success in this world. But then there's an other extreme that says, you know what, I'm a Christian now, and so I'm going to cut all ties with the world. I'm going to divorce my spouse. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to leave the country. I'm going to completely cut all ties from the world. And I am now a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. And I'm going to live as though I have no connections with the earth, with the world. And both of these can be dangerous, just as with the body. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, we get a more balanced view of how it is that we should relate to the world while we are here in the world. In verse 29, Paul says, "But this I say, brethren, the time has been shortened, so that from now on those who have wives should be as though they had none, and those who weep as though they did not weep, and those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, and those who buy as though they did not possess, and those who use the world as though they did not make full use of it, for the form of this world is passing away." All right, so in the context here, Paul was trying to encourage the Christians to not go off the deep end as far as trying to change their social status or marital status or anything like that. He's saying, don't, if you're married, don't leave your spouse, even if they're not a believer. If they want to remain with you, let them remain with you. That sort of thing. And it kind of fits in with what he's saying here. He's just saying that yes, the world is coming to an end. The form of this world is passing away, and what really matters is our spiritual and mental perception of this world, not so much physically what's going on with us and what's going on with us, whether our marital status, our social status, governmental status, or whatever it might be. That doesn't necessarily have to change, but our attitude to the world is what changes. Here he talks about in these verses, he says that those who have wives, those who weep, those who rejoice, those who buy, those who use the world. He doesn't tell them to stop being married, stop weeping, stop rejoicing, and stop using the world. But he gives them the proper attitude to have while they're engaged in these things, as they are connected to the world in these various ways. For instance, he says, those who are married are to be as though they are not married, and those who weep as those who do not weep, and those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, and those who use the world as though they did not make full use of it, and those who buy as though they did not possess. So what he's saying here is that we have a hope now that we are Christians. We are now citizens of heaven. And so on the one hand, we don't just completely cut ties with everything, but on the other hand, we always walk around with the consciousness and with the realization that this really isn't our homeland, that we are seeking another homeland to come, that we are seeking a heavenly country, that we are citizens of the kingdom of heaven. And as we engage in these various activities, we do so recognizing that one day all these things are going to pass away. Our marriages will pass away. The things that we are weeping over today will be long gone. The things that we're rejoicing in will be long gone one day. The things that we buy will certainly be gone one day, probably maybe even before we even die. They'll rust or corrode or somehow become no good anymore. The things that we possess, the things that we use in this world will one day pass away. All these things that we are engaged in, we just need to recognize the fact that these are temporary situations, that we are looking forward to a day when we will be like the angels in heaven, when there is no marriage. We'll look ahead to a day in which all tears will be wiped away from our eyes, that the weeping that we do in this world will be cast away, and we will have joy. And even in the rejoicing that we do in this world, where there's that tinge of sorrow that the rejoicing will one day end, we'll have a rejoicing, a joy that is eternal, that will never end, that will last throughout eternity. The things that we buy will pass away, but the treasures in heaven that we have stored up for us will last for eternity. And so that's more what we should be focused on, is our attitude towards the world, not necessarily changing physically our relationship with the world, just our view of the world and the way that we relate to the world. We have a future hope that goes beyond this world, and so that should change our perspective. So let's let these verses today, as we do our reading, let's let these verses help us calibrate the way that we view this world and how we make use of this world, and to do it with a heavenly perspective and do it with an eternal perspective. And I think it'll help us to relate to the world in the way that God desires. So with that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.